Iceberg videos is something that has been on my radar for quite a while. A lot of YouTube creators have made videos on several different topics, but something that is very surprising to me is that nobody has made a Square Enix one yet. Since I've been a huge fan and loyal supporter of this company for over 2 decades now, and have extensive knowledge about their games, I consider myself to be more than qualified to make an Iceberg video of my own. I'm Sword57, and this is the Square Enix Iceberg. Guile is Magus. Did you know Magus is actually in Chrono Cross? He has a secret mystery identity in the character Guile, who wears a mask. It was pretty well known back in the day, and it's a pretty cool idea to include a character from a previous game. Unfortunately, since the third game Chrono Break was cancelled, we never got a proper Magus reveal or a satisfactory conclusion to his intriguing story arc. If only the Dream Team could reunite once more to bring us the sequel we all desire. Square Nintendo breakup. Back in the 90s, Square used to make games for Nintendo machines because the PlayStation was not out yet. But that changed when Square realized that Sony was the future of gaming and made the correct and righteous decision to move the development of Final Fantasy VII to the more powerful PlayStation system when it was announced. Square, who was eager to leave the questionable Nintendo company for Sony, still wanted their departure to be a clean and peaceful one. But the infamous CEO of Nintendo, Mr. Yamauchi, had more malicious thoughts, and despite fully being aware of the uncivil ways he treated Japanese developers like Square, saw this as an act of betrayal, and publicly stated that JRPGs are for depressed losers who would rather sit in their dark bedrooms and play games by themselves rather than socialize with others. Clearly an untruthful statement of a jealous man who only sought the profit Final Fantasy VII would bring him if it was released for Nintendo. Girugameshu. In Final Fantasy V, during the Clash at the Big Bridge, you will meet Girugameshu. Girugameshu is a very interesting Square Enix character, as he also makes appearances in a lot of other Final Fantasy games, much like the Chocobo and all the different Cids. But Girugameshu is different. Upon closer inspection, you will realize that the Girugameshu you encounter while playing Final Fantasy XIV, or 12, or 5, or 15 are all actually the same Girugameshu. Yes, much like the Dimension Travelers from Sword57 Gaiden, Girugameshu can actually travel between dimensions to different Final Fantasy games and interact with their worlds. It's no wonder why we Final Fantasy fans love Girugameshu. Square and Enix merge. This describes the merge of Japan's 2 biggest JRPG titans. Square and Enix used to be 2 separate developers, known for Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, respectively. But in 2003, both companies realized that they had a lot in common and decided to join forces together to make the JRPG genre even more sugoi than ever. Truly a surprising and exciting event for those of us who were present back then. Link's Grave. In the old version of Final Fantasy I, there are gravestones in the town of Elfenheim that you can interact with. In this version they don't say anything interesting, but in the WonderSwan remake of the game, if you inspect one of the graves, it will say Link's Tomb. This is a message that Square wanted to put in the original game, but it was noticed by Nintendo employees and Square were forced to censor it. But since they were no longer making games for Nintendo, they could finally include this message as a way to show their fans how much they disapprove of Nintendo and how much Zelda sucks. Cloud and Tifa sex. Now, over the years, there has been this rumor that at the end of Disc 2 of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud and Tifa was supposed to have detailed sexual intercourse under the High Wind. Nomura-san was against the idea because it was unethical and a lot of teenagers would be playing the game. Nomura-san is not as horny as Kojima after all. So instead of that mature scene, it instead fades to black in the official release. I don't know how accurate this fact is, but it is interesting.
The Bouncer.
In the year 2000, Square Enix released a technical brawler RPG game, The Bouncer. It's a really good game. Square Enix USA. A few years ago, Square Enix happened to acquire the rights to a bunch of American video games. The games that came out of this deal were unfortunately made by Westerners, so the games turned out bad and were not up to par with Square Enix's own properties. I mean, just look at this game called Deus Ex. It's not even a real JRPG, with no turn-based combat or an intricate world map to walk across. How lame! Lucky for us though, Square Enix noticed this as well and got rid of those IPs and put the resources toward good Japanese games instead. Good on you, Square Enix. Square Enix supports LGBTQ+. In 2021, Square Enix revealed their support for the LGBTQ+ community and even designed a mascot for the occasion. But did you know that Square supported them before everyone else? In Final Fantasy VII, back in the 90s, there is a place you can visit called Honeybee Inn. There you'll see characters that show how progressive and inclusive Square Enix was even back then. And later in the game, you can even go on a date with Barrett, which is very funny. Overall, it just shows that no matter who you are important and Square Enix accepts and loves you. You are just as valuable to them as any other fan. Square Enix composers. Sugiyama Koichi, a man who needs no introduction. He was one of Square Enix's top composers, and he composed the soundtrack for the first ever JRPG ever made, Dragon Quest. He created some of the most iconic and memorable pieces in video game history. He is also unfortunately not with us anymore, but we will always remember his music ages from now. Rest in peace, Sugiyama-san. This is however just one of the incredible musical talents that work under the Square Enix umbrella. We also have talents like Yoshinori Mitsuda, who composed the music for games like Chrono Cross and Xenogears. And we can of course not forget about the fantastic Nobuo Uematsu, who created music for the Final Fantasy series, and who also formed the band The Black Mages. They are awesome and make the best music. Final Fantasy at the Olympics. During the synchronized duet swimming competition at the 2004 Olympics in Athens, the main theme of Final Fantasy VIII, Liberi Fateri, was chosen by the US team to be used as the background soundtrack while they performed. I was so moved by this performance. To finally see Westerners appreciating Far Eastern Japanese culture was truly a sight to behold. And they were easily the best at the competition. But the judges were racist and hated Final Fantasy, so they only got a bronze medal. Luca in Xenogears. This is one of my personal favorites. In Xenogears, Luca from Chrono Trigger makes an appearance. This is something I'm surprised no one talks about, because with her included in Xenogears, it means that using the epoch, Luca traveled to the future to Xenogears, putting Xenogears, Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross in the same universe. This, coupled with the fact that Xenogears is canonically episode 5 in an ongoing story that was planned by the developers, makes this even more interesting, as we can confirm that 2300 AD and the future event of Chrono Trigger after Lavos was defeated, which prevented the ruined world scenario, is considered episode 1 in the story, and Chrono Cross is episode 2. While this is very cool world building, it pains me that Chrono Break was cancelled and we never got to see what the Dream Team had planned for us fans to enjoy. I Love You controversy. I've been meaning to talk about this one for a while. I'm sure you fellow Square Enix fans are familiar with the I Love You line from Final Fantasy X. But did you know that it is actually wrong? Take a listen to the original line from the original Japanese version.
Arigato.
Here she says arigato, which means thank you. For the Japanese, this was very satisfying, as Yuna was thanking Tidus for the time they spent together, as it was very obvious that they were in love. But that is not how Westerners see it. During the American playtesting of Final Fantasy X, the Western testers were confused and didn't understand what was going on. This is because Westerners are dumb, and they need to have things like this spelled out for them to understand what's going on in the story. I guess this is just another reminder that next time you play a Japanese game, make sure to play it in Japanese so that you can get the correct experience. Elevator pitch. Shinji Hashimoto of Square Enix fame has been cited many times as the reason why Kingdom Hearts exists. The story goes that Hashimoto-san accidentally took an elevator together with an executive of Disney, and that it was during this elevator ride that the idea of Kingdom Hearts was first conceived. Hence the title of this segment. Square and Disney share the same building in Tokyo, which is why it's believable that this event occurred. However, nobody else was present during this unscheduled secret meeting, so what happened during it is completely unknown to us. But what I believe happened is that when the elevator doors closed, the Disney executive most likely threatened Hashimoto-san, I would imagine with a knife or something like that, and told him to make a game called Kingdom Hearts with Final Fantasy characters and put Donald Duck in it. Of course Hashimoto-san didn't want to, since Disney makes American cartoons aimed towards small children, and that doesn't fit at all with the more mature, deep and thought-provoking stories that Square was known for. But unfortunately, he didn't have much of a choice. Final Fantasy III is Final Fantasy VI. Here is a really stupid one. So apparently, when Final Fantasy VI came out in the West, great game by the way, they called the game Final Fantasy III instead of just calling it by its original name. The reason for this is because Final Fantasy II, the actual Final Fantasy III, and Final Fantasy V were never released in the West for some reason, and Westerners were so selfish that they refused to keep track of the Final Fantasies that were released in Japan. So Square had to rename it to Final Fantasy III. Hidden message. Pray for Japan. This hidden line of text can be found early on in Final Fantasy XIII-2 during a cutscene with lightning. The yellow energy lines that you see contains this message written in one of Final Fantasy XIII's languages. But if you look closely, you can see that it says "Pray for Japan." But what does this mean? Shinji Mikami, the legendary creator of Resident Evil, was deeply engrossed in working on a new Japanese game. He was teaming up and developing it together with the very cool Suda51. It was called Shadow of the Damned and was released on June 21st, 2011 for the PlayStation 3. But that year, another product came out that would overshadow Shadow the Damned and all Japanese games: Minecraft. And for the rest of 2011, Westerners were too busy building Lego building in a virtual made-up world rather than playing good video games. This hit Japanese developers like Square Enix very hard, who was only trying to create amazing experiences for their players. And Square Enix are good friends with Shinji Mikami, so realizing that this was a bad omen for Japanese games for the future, Square Enix left this message to all Japanese supporters in the West so that they could pray for Japan. And that is the end of this iceberg. Arigato so much for watching. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment about your own favorite Square Enix trivia. I would also like to take a moment to thank all my patrons. And I would also like to give a huge arigato to my daimyoling on Patreon. Arigato, Sairivu-san. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. And have a good night, evening, morning, or day. Moshi mosh!